test is the meat.
Yeah, I'm good.
That wasn't good.
I told you not to put that camera down there.
And now for another edition of Mind Blown with the Rocketman.
That's right. Here we are, back at the ranch.
Yeah,
About
right.
to get military secrets.
About to get some top secret military secrets.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
from the man himself here.
It
and
was.
other things.
Yeah.
Among other things.
yeah. It's so when I say military secrets, I don't necessarily imply that it's classified information, or otherwise I wouldn't be telling you about it, or I wouldn't know about it. But secret in the sense that it's been published in military journals, Journal of Spacecraft and Rockets, and ARL, Army Research Laboratory presentations, but not generally released to the public. So this is the first time this information, as far as I know, has been put out there, put forth, and
Frig.
yeah, if the Chinese come after me, what's your address?
You'll be poisoned.
I guess with that, I'll just get started. And what I want to do is pick up on a previous conversation that we had where we talked about practical aero stability. And this will feed into the technology, and it will relate to arrows, and you'll see why in just a minute. So let me turn this around. And the reason I say practical aero stability is if all of this didn't mean anything, right, if we didn't need to know this to understand how arrows fly, we could probably still make arrows fly. But if you start having problems getting arrows to fly, how do you fix them? How do you know where to go, what direction to move things or change things to get things to fly better? And that's what we were talking about yesterday, and that's why I call this practical aero stability. So let's talk about stability first and what that means. What it really means is it's like this. If you take a pendulum and you pull it back and let it go, right, it'll go through center and it'll come back on the other side, but it won't go as high on that side as it did when you released it. And then as it continues to damp out, ultimately it'll come to rest, right, pointing straight down. And when an arrow flies, you want that same kind of behavior, right, that stability in flight. And so when an arrow flies, it tends to pitch. This is what we talked about before. It tends to rotate about the center of gravity. But you can think of this as two, in a similar way that you can think of a pendulum. This arrow is going to pitch up, and then it's come back to the shot line, and then pitch down, and then pitch back up. And ultimately what you want is the amplitude of that pitching and yawing motion to damp out the same way that the pendulum damped out. And so that is what's called static stability.
And it doesn't matter if you have your arrow tuned and it's flying straight and you're shooting bullet holes out in the paper right out of the bow, it's still doing that. They're all still doing that to some degree.
But they're all doing that the same way.
Right.
Yeah. So there's two things that are actually going on, and they're becoming more detrimental as arrows begin to fly faster, especially with these new crossbows that are flying at 500 feet per second. If you take high-speed video, which we've done, you watch these things, and they are actually look bent when they come out. They actually are bent, and they're flexing all the way to the target like this. So not only do you have this issue of the amplitude due to the pitching and yawing motion, and you want that to damp out, right? You also have this bending that doesn't damp out completely. By the time you get even out to 100 yards, you still have quite a bit of amplitude of that bending motion. And both of those tend to, especially when you have broadheads on the front of your arrow, tend to cause the arrow to go off the shot line, right, to be inaccurate. In fact, we were just seeing that today. We were shooting a solid fixed blade broadhead, and we unscrewed that, and we put a vented broadhead on there, and we got a much better grouping at the target in the wind. And that is exactly because of this system of how the arrow flies through the air. And by that system, what I mean is you get lift from the nose, from the broadhead, and you get lift from the tail.
From the fletchings.
From the fletching, right. And so people might ask, well, why don't you get lift from the cylinder? Why don't you get lift from the shaft? Because it's pointed up as well, and it's flying like this. So there was a wind tunnel study done back in 1918, okay, on World War I biplanes. And of course, the biplanes have bracing in between, and they wanted to know how much lift they might get if the bracing, encountered an angle of attack. And what they found out that up to 10 degrees, it doesn't generate any lift at all. And so the rocket people know this, and now the aero people also know this, that, you don't really generate any lift off of this shaft. But you do get some from the nose, and you do get some from the tail. Now, this is exactly why people shoot mechanical broadheads, because they can eliminate this lift at the nose location.
Like a field point would.
Yeah, like a field point. A field point really has zero lift up here. And you get lift from the tail, and so even if your arrow is bending like this, and it's pitched up, that lift from the tail wants to pitch it back down. Now it swings through, just like the pendulum swings through center. It's over on the other side, but it doesn't go as far. Now the lift is in the opposite direction, and it's bringing it back through the shot line again, through the trajectory line, and then so on and so forth until it damps out the same way that the pendulum does. And you get the lesser and lesser amplitude as you go downrange.
Sure.
Okay, so the big deal for stable arrow flight is the torque generated from the lift times its distance to the center of gravity. Remember, this is the pivot point in flight, is greater than the lift times its distance from the center of gravity in front. Okay, so basically you have an overturning torque or a destabilizing torque from the nose, and you have a stabilizing torque from the tail. So if you can, with like a mechanical, if you get rid of this, the destabilizing port, it's easier to get your arrow to fly, and that's why mechanicals fly better than fixed blade broadheads.
Sure.
Okay, and so to me that makes perfect sense. Now I could go into detail about the center of pressure, which I did the other day, right? But I think for this discussion we really don't want to do that. We want to keep this on the simple terms. But for you math guys, if you sum the moments around the center of gravity and you set that equal to the x distance and solve for where the center of pressure is, you can do that from these two diagrams. So just know if you've had college statics or something like that, and you sum the moments, you'll get the location of the center of pressure. All right, so that's above everybody's pay grade mostly.
Oh, yeah. It's way above my head.
And nobody really cares about that.
We just want to fly a stick, Barnett.
Yeah. Okay. So, but for some guys who are watching the videos who understand that, this diagram is no different than the single force in the center of pressure. And we talked yesterday about trying to get the center of pressure further back and the center of gravity further forward to get more stability out of the arrow. Okay, so here's the military secret that they spent millions of dollars on, and they meaning Army Research Laboratory, and the people that I know that wrote the patent are Dr. Ed Schmidt and William Donovan, and I know Dr. Schmidt because he was our technical point of contact of the electromagnetic railgun program. So he's the one that introduced me to the concept, and that concept is very simply that you can get rid of the lift from the nose if instead of having this fixed to the shaft that you put a gimbal up here inside the nose and allow this nose to point into the wind as you're shooting or launching the projectile. This is pointing into the wind. So no matter how the rest of the arrow or the body of the projectile is moving around, this is always pointed downwind. And it's the same concept as I think you mentioned the other day, weather vane on top of a barn. In the slightest wind, it always points in the direction of the oncoming wind. Well, the oncoming wind is what you generate when you launch the arrow. Right. You're
whether there's actual wind you can
wind.
feel or not, it's getting that.
Yeah. So aerodynamicists call that the relative wind.
Sure.
It's the relative to the body that's flying.
Okay.
And so it's as if the body is staying still and the air is flying over.
And we said yesterday that just to make it simpler, the atmosphere has mass and you're pushing it out of the way. That's relative wind at the simplest.
Yeah,
if you shoot through, it'd be easier to see when you shoot. Do you see ballistic gel testing or something?
Yeah.
It's the same thing. Ballistic gel stops the arrows. I got that. But the actual atmosphere's mass is got to be pushed out of the way.
You're always shooting through something.
Shooting through something. That's right.
It's just
always
shooting
through something. That's
yeah, we talked about this the other day, or even last year, that arrows fly through animals, and they fly through air and they fly through animals.
Right.
They fly through water.
It's
they fly
always
through
flying.
blood. It's always flying until it stops. It's always flying. So the question I had a long time ago, I worked on this with Dr. Schmidt on some projectile concepts. And I want to show you a reference that you guys can go and find on the internet from the Army. You can read about it, and you can read about the potential benefits of the concept. And this is called Improved Dispersion, this paper, Improved Dispersion of a fin-stabilized projectile. Well, that's arrows, right? Using a passive movable nose. And what they did was they just took the nose of a tank gun projectile flying at Mach 5. They put a gimbal on it, and they launched it. Okay, and let me say, this is by Mark Costello, Dr. Mark Costello at Georgia Tech, and Agarwala, and this was written in 2001. So if you wanted to read about this and wanted to see some of the advantages, you read the introduction and the conclusion and skip the math on this. It's pretty heavy.
Cliff notes.
It's pretty heavy.
It's pretty heavy, right? But
I can only imagine what that looks like.
Basically, for me, that means
for
I'm
mere
not gonna
mortals,
understand any
don't
of it.
read the middle.
Yeah, just read the introduction, and it tells you the setup. And the bottom line is this: they got 50% less dispersion if they put a movable nose on the front of the projectile. So when I was working with Dr. Schmidt, we were launching very flexible projectiles because that was the nature of getting more lethality out of them at that time. And I had to have a situation. I had a situation where the back of the arrow, or the back of the projectile that we were launching, couldn't control what the nose was doing. The whole thing was too flexible. So you might get that restoring force back here, but it couldn't transmit through the shaft to be able to get up to the front.
You're talking
and draw
about
that
something
down.
made out of aluminum as opposed to made out of rubber.
Yeah,
flexible
right.
like that.
It
Like
was very
literally it
flexible.
was bent like crazy.
Yeah. And
really?
so the first introduction that I had to the concept was through Dr. Schmidt, and what we did was we put a gimbal nose on the front to fly the front, and we put a conic section, or fins, on the back to fly the back, and the whole thing flew like this all the way downrange and was successful. So, and I love, from that concept, that was probably 15 years ago, I've held on to the concept to sort of reintroduce it into the archery community. And so this is the first time this concept has ever been applied to arrows. And by and large, over the last 5 years, I've launched more of these than the Army ever launched projectiles using the same technology. I started from that idea. We talked about the theory, and that is to get the nose to always point into to weathercock into the oncoming wind. And then regardless of what the rest of the shaft was doing, this arrow would, basically you're compressing all of the aerodynamics of the whole arrow into the broadhead.
Right.
Okay. Now, so what's the real advantage of that? One is that you can shoot larger broadheads. Now instead of shooting maybe 1 1/8 inch fixed blade broadhead, which is kind of a standard size, you might want to shoot a 2-inch diameter broadhead. You might want to shoot a 3-inch diameter broadhead. You may want to shoot a 6-inch diameter broadhead.
Like a turkey head.
Like a turkey head, right? This technology, because it takes the lift out of the nose, allows you then to shoot that type of broadhead and not affect the arrow flight. So now we're going to move to my test and what I've been testing with the plastic broadheads that I just 3D print. The aerodynamics are the same, but it's much cheaper to get these things 3D printed, especially if I print my own, right, than to go out and get them machined every time you have a change of, you want to change the concept or test something else. So this is what I did. I went to Amazon. I bought the biggest bounce house blower I could possibly find that would deliver the air at 200 miles an hour and set it up in my bedroom. Right? Because I don't want to go outside and do this. It's
Your whole house is a laboratory.
Yeah.
His whole house is a lab.
Yeah. So
here you go. Here you go, Ranch.
Yes,
you can have
I need
this.
some coffee.
Mindy, I'll have some
of
coffee.
Of course I need coffee.
Oh, now
I just don't need very much.
Here.
Just like a little bit.
Let's go, Zach.
Do it, dude.
You want to watch the videos?
Yeah, let's show a video here.
All right.
And so we'll, around the table, we'll be looking on the computer.
Look at
Hopefully
these videos of the blower that he's got in his bedroom here. This is 3-blade, right?
This is a 3-blade.
Do you have one of those?
I have a 4-blade of the same size,
Okay.
and it looks like this.
Appreciate it.
Except it
Thank
only
you,
has
Mindy.
3 blades instead of 4. And this is, I think, a 3-inch diameter blade. And so I can do all the testing in the living room without having to go out to the range or let anybody see what I'm doing. And so here's what you see. I've got the blower blowing out towards the door there.
Yep.
And the arrow is adjusting to the wind that's blowing, regardless of what I'm doing. I'm moving the arrow shaft
That's
around.
crazy, isn't it? Look at that.
That's crazy.
The arrow shaft is moving around in the
Broadhead's staying on line.
The broadhead's staying on line, and what I'm doing there is I'm holding this thing by the knock of the arrow at the very back of the arrow. And if you tried to do this with any standard broadhead, the arrow would just flip out of your hand.
Can you actually feel it trying to fly into the wind like that?
Yeah, you can see it trying to.
Immediately.
It's moving around.
Zach, we want to shoot it. We want to shoot it. We want to shoot it.
Okay.
Me and Zach want to shoot it.
So that's the 3-blade test, and I'm like, okay, so if it works for a 3-blade, let me go back and talk to you about fletching. I mentioned this earlier today. And in the military, you would never do this unless you had onboard stabilization. You would never shoot a 2-blade broadhead on the front of a missile, or sorry, 2 fins on the front of the missile and 3 on the back. Okay? You'd never want fins on the front ahead of the center of gravity ever on a projectile, and most rockets don't have that unless they're stabilized electronically as they fly through the air, because it's unstable, right? You make these fins too big up here. Well, so the reason I've tested the 3-blade broadhead first is because no matter what the roll orientation of the arrow is, it generates the same amount of lift regardless of the orientation. Okay, so what that means is if you had a 2-blade broadhead up here and it was, let's say, up and down, right? Here's the plane of the broadhead.
On a normal arrow.
On a normal arrow, it would generate sideways lift, right? If it tended to come off the shot line, and so the fletching has to move it back. But now if the arrow has the broadhead is flat, parallel to the earth, and it pitches up, now it's moving up this way. So it's not a symmetric system. It tends to push up when the broadhead is flat, and it push sideways when the broadhead is vertical. And so I decided, well, that's not probably the best place to start with this kind of concept, because I'm trying to compress all of the flight mechanics into the broadhead itself. And so I started with the 3-blade, and that's what we see here. And that was the first successful test on bench test of the concept. But now I went back and I spent quite a bit of time looking at the 2-blade concept, like that. Yep. And this is a 3.5-inch diameter 2-blade broadhead.
This is a single bevel.
Oh yeah, that one is too.
Yep. Single bevel broadhead.
And this is what you would.
Those are bleeder blades.
Those are bleeder blades.
Yeah.
That's pretty crazy.
Yeah, and so if you watch the video, what you'll see is I test each one of the, I think a 2-inch diameter single bevel 2-blade broadhead.
There's the big one there.
Well, no, that's not even the big one.
Oh, really?
No, I think that's the one, and that's the 2.5 diameter, and then I have a 3.5-inch diameter, which this is the nanny bomb of broadheads.
Now, what I'm curious about already is there you've got wind blowing in right there on that blower.
Yeah, it's a squirrel cage blower.
Is that comparative amount of wind force to
the relative wind that we're shooting?
Relative wind that you're shooting
to. It is,
to.
in fact. So that's why I had to buy a great big one, like a $400 one.
Yeah.
To get enough airflow.
Well, I assume that you did that. All this was planned out.
Yeah.
So
like that. So that's blowing at about 200 miles an hour.
Okay.
That's in my living room or in my bedroom. So it's like I have to move everything off the tables and kind of tape things down and stuff, because you can see my T-shirt my T-shirt there is kind of rippling in the wind pretty good. So it does match the velocity of what you would see, right?
Yep.
It's basically a little wind tunnel.
It's doing the same thing though that 4-blade or the 3-blade that was doing in the previous video. Like it's flying straight.
So we could get penetration, a real high penetration projectile, and get it to fly.
Yeah, that's right. So you can get a very large fixed blade or a 3-blade. I'm sorry, fixed blade, 2-blade, 3-blade, 4-blade broadhead to fly like a field point. And when I mean, I don't mean that. You still have the drag of the broadhead. Any broadhead's going to have more drag than the corresponding field point, but it doesn't generate any lift. So that means that it's, regardless of the size of the broadhead, it's not going to generate any lift up here. And that, in that sense, it flies like a field point would fly, because a field point doesn't generate any lift up here at all, as well.
Because it's a gimbal that's moving.
It's a gimbal.
It allows the fins, the wings, the blades on your broadhead to move.
Yeah. And point.
What's that?
And so they always point, just like a weather vane does, it always points into the oncoming wind. That's exactly what this does. So if you initially have it pointed at the target, and you let it go, right, it's going to fly, and the broadhead is going to fly in that direction regardless of what the shaft is doing.
So how did the actual broadheads, because you got some of your test models here, right?
Well, yeah, but I wanted to show some of the flights that I already did in the plastic versions first, because I mean there's a timeline here. I thought maybe we would walk through that timeline.
I forgot about these
until
videos.
we get to here.
This is your first flight video.
Okay,
this is with a fletched arrow.
This has fletching on the back of the arrow, and it's a gimbaled broadhead on the front of the arrow, and it's basically this broadhead except it's white. I can't tell if that one has fletching on it or not, but it looks like it doesn't actually have.
It does.
It's got there it is. Yeah, this one has the fletching on it. So this is coming out of the arrow gun. It's flying about 300 feet per second, but it's a plastic broadhead, and that was the first actual test where everything worked great. Everything worked the way it was. It hit the same place that the field points did. I didn't do anything but unscrew the field points and put the broadhead on and shoot it.
So it looks like bad arrow flight, but it's not, because the broadhead is actually flying
The
straight.
broadhead is flying. That shaft is just doing whatever it does. It's either blown over. There's a pretty stiff crosswind on this shot, and it's moved over.
The shaft is only used to launch it.
Only used to launch it. So to prove that, what I did was I cut all the fletching off of this great big arrow with a fixed blade broadhead on it, 3.5 inch diameter, 3 inch diameter.
Yeah, I mean this thing's
flipping
flipping huge. I mean, look at this thing fly through the air.
That's a fletchless
That's the
arrow.
broadhead in the.
That's the fletchless. Look at that. It's flying just as good. It might even fly straighter.
It's actually hitting where those 3 points up there are fletchless field points of the same weight, and it's hitting where the field point. And actually, the second one actually is flying better than that one. Show the second fletchless arrow.
It's so funny to see an arrow that's cocked to the side, but if you really understand what you're doing, the broadhead's doing fine.
Yeah, the broadhead's doing fine.
Because of your blower example.
Yeah.
Like you can look at and you can see it in this from the opposite direction, actually going at the target.
Yeah, that's right.
You can see that the broadhead's flying straight. It's going right at it.
Yeah, and so what that means is the implication is that you can use very small fletching on the back of your broadhead, right? You can shoot a very big broadhead, very small fletching, and the concept of FOC is gone.
Right, because it's not.
We're gonna have to pick Troy's brain up off of the floor.
Right.
Put it back in.
It's not attached to the stick.
It's gimbaled up. Where it pivots is up here,
No. Yeah.
regardless of the center of gravity. Right? I just said earlier, all arrows pivot around the center of gravity. This arrow shaft pivots around the broadhead, or you could say the broadhead pivots.
So then we just got to figure out if it'll penetrate.
Yeah. But I think we can make it penetrate. I only get one shot with those broadheads, and then they blow up. Right. I got to go make more. I got to go get more gimbals, more metal gimbals, put it all together, shoot them. So this has been a probably 4-year process of actual doing the testing. I knew about the technology a long time ago. But in order to put everything together, to get the blower, to get a capability of launching
you shot 'em
it,
out
to
here.
get the video, we shot that 8-inch 2-blade broadhead
a year and a half ago.
Yeah, I don't even have video of that. But those were laser cut metal 8-inch turkey blades, and so just more testing along the way to see what the limits are and what the advantages are. And so, what are the advantages? Number one, you can shoot larger broadheads. Relative to mechanicals, you can shoot on the order of a mechanical broadhead diameter. I've already shown on the bench, at least, you can shoot 2-blade, 3-blade, or 4-blade. But the other aspect of that is that they're more forgiving from the launch aspect. Remember I said in the Army research that they saw 50% less dispersion when they put a gimbal nose on the front of their projectile. And their projectiles look like arrows. They just fly at Mach 5. But the aerodynamics are the same.
Will the speed be affected, or your overall trajectory, or anything like that?
I mean, if I put an 8-inch broadhead on the front, yes.
Sure.
Right? But if you put standard-sized broadheads, maybe 1.5 inch, 1 5/8, 2-inch, something like that.
They're 100 grain, 150 grain, 200 grain, whatever.
Yeah, I'll show you some prototypes that I'm working with the guys at Boning, who are we have a joint arrangement to try to get these ultimately to market, right? And so I've been working with them and doing some testing with them. We've tested the metal prototypes out to 90 yards. The smallest group, 60 and 90 yards, the smallest group that we've gotten so far for a 3-shot group is 0.9 inches at 60 yards.
From the arrow gun?
No, from I think it was a 400 foot per second crossbow.
Okay.
So it had all the bending, it had everything with it.
And it was hauling ass.
It was hauling ass, and out at 60 yards, we got less than a 1-inch group with that broadhead. So basically, you can shoot larger broadheads. So the limit has been, because of the lifting, that up to about 1.25 inches. It makes sense, and then you begin to vent the broadheads because you have to, or they're not going to fly well. They're more forgiving. So if the whole arrow is bent, the arrowhead is still pointing downrange. So if the arrow's doing this downrange or bending back and forth downrange, the arrowhead itself is still pointed downrange and flying and not generating any lift. If you didn't do that, if you shot a very no one would ever shoot a broadhead with a 600 spine arrow. Anyway, the reason you won't is because that arrow will bend. You'll generate lift on the front of that arrow, and it'll wind plane off to heaven. It'll go wherever it wants to go. In this concept, you get larger broadheads, a more forgiving system that if you're not in tune, you can still shoot an accurate arrow, and easier tuning. Knock tuning and all of these kinds of things kind of go away because knock tuning is affected by that nose lift. The reason you knock tune is try to get all your arrows to lift in the same direction or bend in the same direction or ultimately lift in the same direction when they come off the bow. I have some metal prototypes that I've worked on here, and they're out here on the table. Maybe you can't quite see them, but it's the same idea here. It's a little bit different in application. So because what I realized fairly early on, of course, when I first did my first metal prototypes on my own, I thought, well, I'll just pivot the whole arrowhead just like they did in the military. But the military, they're impacting at Mach 5. We're impacting at Mach 0.5, if that. And so as soon as this hits the target, if it's all wobbly like this, it's going to deflect and then fly off inside the animal in whatever direction you want to go. So part of developing the concept was develop an idea where the arrow is launched, or the broadhead is launched, and it's all pointing downrange the way it's supposed to, just like a solid fixed blade broadhead. But as soon as the arrow is launched, it pushes through and is captured on a ball inside of the broadhead, and it's able now to spin and pivot, all the way to the target and even through the target.
But your point is static.
The point is static. The point is tied to the shaft.
Yep.
I don't know if I can take
this
apart.
But this now, once it's pushed back, is helping fly the shaft.
Right, because it can wobble around.
Because it's on a gimbal, just like in the videos that we showed.
That's exactly right.
So it's actually flying this point straight into the target. Correct?
Yeah, that's right. If it's on the arrow, it looks like a standard, or a fairly standard broadhead. I mean, there's a little bit of difference here. You're like, there's something going on that's a little bit different.
Right.
As soon as this is launched, you're pushing on the back of the arrow, or pushing on the arrow, and it pushes off of that lock and moves backward. And now it's free to gimbal. I think it has about a 7-degree per side rotation, and it's free to pivot like that. So it's free to fly by itself. And that's what you want. And so let's look at the components of this, because it's not really that complicated. So the way I've designed it is that we can use any particular nose shape that you might want. If you wanted an Ashby style single bevel nose tip,
like a Tonto tip,
you could put that on here. If you wanted this like a more symmetrical kind of shape, you can do that. And basically, there's the 3 components. I've integrated the ball into the shaft here, and this is nothing more than a socket design. And so since the ball is integrated, there's only 3 pieces, so it's pretty simple. Believe me, the first one's a lot more complicated than this. But that's all there is to it, right? And so the idea is that you could shoot, these shafts are either made out of steel, titanium, or aluminum. The nose would be steel, the ferrule is aluminum, but you can shoot any size blade that you might want.
Look at these things. Freaking helicopter.
The turkey chopper. That's a turkey chopper.
Turkey chopper.
We've tested these 2 small versions indoors. We really want to test them outdoors in the wind to see if
it's windy right now, Barnett.
You guys are pushing me hard.
So, he wants to shoot it.
Yeah. So there's the sort of
proof of concept, baby.
The proof of concept, really. And so here's what I'm thinking on this type of idea, on this type of even the ferrule. On these crossbows that are shooting 400 and 500 feet per second, right? You can blow through an animal, right? So there's no doubt that a single bevel broadhead, if you could get it to fly off of that crossbow, will shoot right through an animal, even 70, 80, 90 yards or whatever. There's plenty of energy to do that. My premise is if you have enough energy to get through the animal, let's spend the rest of that energy trying to blow a big hole through the animal. Let's get a big blood trail. But that's based on the premise that you're able to first get through the animal.
Right.
That's the
you have to maintain
priority.
your energy through the animal.
Well,
right.
if the broadheads don't break, or if they're, I mean, that's a lot to go through, and if you, bones and all that stuff, we'll have to figure it out.
Yeah, we'll have to figure, especially if we're going to shoot something that big. I'm leery. You know, testing is one thing. Experience on animals is something else.
Well,
and I'm not advocating for that.
No, I got that, but I'm just saying when you
idea.
Theoretically, your perfect kill shot just got smaller because if the scapula and everything's in there and this thing's that big, you'd have to actually shoot in a tighter area.
Which is exactly what, you know,
happens with mechanicals too.
Right. That's the big deal with mechanicals that people like, is that they're giant cutting diameter.
Yeah.
But
but the outer edge of that cutting diameter where you might hit something hard reduces the kill zone.
It does.
But it's still going to be
so
super fun. I want to shoot something that big.
Well, I would like to make some of those, and
it's interesting that this is a way that you can get a fixed blade to fly like a mechanical.
That's exactly
or a field
right.
point.
That's right.
Because then that's the disadvantage of a mechanical, if you will, is because it's going to take up a ton of energy whenever it hits the animal, because it's got to deploy those.
But we still got to
blades.
get this thing to fly through an animal, so we got to figure that out.
Yeah.
Yeah. I haven't done that yet. Certainly not. I mean, these are hot off the press. We got just last month. They've done some initial testing. You can. Those you unscrew. Those are single bevel. You unscrew them, and they're a straight edge on them. So you just lay them on the.
Yep. That's what we got to see is the structural integrity.
Correct.
Yep. So on these, I've hung out with you a long time. If it's easy to sharpen, people will sharpen it. If they tend to be difficult, like if I had a Maasai type curve on here or something, a little bit more difficult to sharpen. But these are replaceable blades, right? They have straight bevel on them. So if you had your jig and you wanted to sharpen them, they're fairly easy to sharpen. And although I've done the 3-blade, the concept could be a 4-blade or it could be a 2-blade as well.
But it's pretty dang cool idea, and we got it, like you said.
Yeah.
We got to shoot it, and we got to test it.
Yeah, the fact that the military spent millions of dollars on it, and it's true aerospace technology brought down to the archery world. You know, that alone, to me, and the military found benefit, 50% less dispersion when you launch
you
something
can see
with a
it in
pivot
flight
nose.
that it's flying.
So if we shoot it, do you think that thing will hold together if we just shoot the target?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, well, we're going to find out.
I'm nervous as hell.
Why?
Why? I'm going to lose this $500 broadhead. You're not going to lose it.
That's your thumbnail. We need a picture of him panicked and says $500 broadhead.
Where's your Zannies at, Rash?
Okay, so you got to load it, right? I mean, you just got to pull it forward and twist it a little bit to get it up on that.
It's up there, isn't it?
Okay, that's fine.
Check it to make sure.
It's fine.
It's good, huh?
Yeah, it's good.
We're about to send this thing on its maiden voyage through a target here.
It's gonna be your most expensive shot of your life.
Can I shoot it like 5 yards?
No.
My heart's pounding as hard as it would be if I had a big dick.
Right now?
I'm about to shoot a $500 broadhead into a target. There's only one of them.
You got this, Aaron.
Ready? Good.
All right, here we go. Okay.
Perfect.
And
it went through.
And it flew good.
Looked like it did.
Flew pretty good anyway.
Try to get the same group or something. Do whatever you do on any broadhead.
Okay.
Good shot, bud.
You guys ready?
Mm-hmm.
Round 2.
Great shot.
that's happy. So he's not sad.
That wasn't good. That wasn't good.
I told you not to put that camera down there.
What?
That wasn't good. Is the head still there?
Yeah. Yeah, but what does that do?
It's a little scuff mark.
Is that where it hit? Down that low?
I think it hit this low, yeah. Well, we just about shot the camera.
That would have been no good.
It hit the tripod, did it?
Oh yeah.